I'm wondering, Phil, if you could kind of describe the problem that you saw that people at the time didn't. So people thinking about blockchain as a bulletin board, and you're seeing it in a different way. And you are a decentralization maxi, self ascribed. I'm taking that to mean you saw the decentralized properties of the system under threat from this particular class of problems. Can you
Mm.
describe the problem? Like, what is the problem of MEV? I mean, the easiest way to understand for a crypto native, for a crypto listener, what is the class of problems that you saw then and you're still on a quest to solve?
Well, I think the fundamental problem is that what blockchains try to and need to do for them to work is to come up with an order of events, of transactions that they're processing, and kind of communicate to everyone that this is the order that we all accept for these events or these transactions. I think people hadn't maybe taken into account how much discretionary power there is in the mechanism that actually comes up with this order. So, in terms of reordering transactions or inserting your own transactions or censoring transactions, these are all options that essentially the infrastructure providers of these networks have the option to do from a technical perspective. And there's nothing in the economics that prohibits them from doing these things. But they're very much not the expected behavior. And they lead to this very complicated problem of, okay, if I'm one of these infrastructure providers, what is the most profitable thing I can do in the system? The core problem there is this creates basically an asymmetry. So people who are more sophisticated in being able to leverage these powers, being able to reorder transactions, to insert their own and to censor, have an advantage in the system over ones who don't because they get paid more per action, basically. And if you're a game theorist, what that means is when you play the game many times, basically these are the set that will play the game because they're the ones that are profiting more than the other ones. They can afford to drive the other players essentially out of the system. If you look at the act of actually building a block and what it entails when it comes to most of these transactions being DEX transactions, being financial transactions, the players and the entities that have the most sophistication in actually maximizing their own revenue against this kind of optimization problem of how do I actually process these transactions? How do I build a block? The players that have an advantage in that game are essentially hedge funds, proprietary traders, and people who have maybe other reasons to be trading on the blockchain other than purely providing infrastructure, things like arbitrage. And so my fear was essentially that our system was enshrining a concentration of power on the infrastructure level to these players. Essentially, the more they could kind of play these games and do so in a way that was allowed, essentially, that was more sophisticated than other parties. So I think that's one problem. And it could potentially, at least at the time, one of the big concerns was you can concentrate the validator set of ETH this way, where if you're doing a proof of stake analysis, this was before we moved to proof of stake, you're relying on having many parties with many incentives to kind of come to this robust consensus. If those incentives aren't as clear or clean as what you're putting on paper, then your consensus maybe won't actually come to fruition. So that's kind of how the system could ultimately break as a result.
One of the reasons why I think many people who are in crypto for the tech come to crypto is they see the equitable foundations on which these platforms like Ethereum, like Bitcoin provide to the world. I think, Phil, what you identified in MEV is like, oh, we do have this equitable foundation, but MEV can tilt it into the balance of tilt power into the balance of parties that already have it, right? People that are already well capitalized to market make, right? Like technical MEV bot coders who have this power and they can capture that value. And that can be expressed in an increasing concentration of ETH stake at a faster rate than non-technical people. And so, being a decentralization maxi, I think this is perhaps like one of the arcs of Flashbots is like, how do we preserve the equitable foundations of these platforms? One of the big flagship products out of Flashbots was this thing called MEV Boost. Can you talk about MEV Boost and how it produces and like helps maintain the equitable foundations of Ethereum?
Yeah, so MEV Boost came out of a line of research called PBS, or Proposer Builder Separation. Highly recommend reading up on that if you're not familiar with it. This was, many people's kind of memes, spearheaded mainly by Vitalik, I would say, but with many kind of contributors in the community. And this is the idea of basically separating this sophisticated activity of optimizing blocks from the activity of proposing blocks on the network. So the actual proof of stake protocol that was being designed. The reason for this was we had a system called MEV, which worked on proof of work. It was a very different auction. And all we were trying to do there is basically show people, one, ordering matters, and two, in a permissionless auction for ordering, you basically get more value for all parties if that auction is permissionless and competitive than you do in a proprietary or like side deal style auction. When proof of stake came, the question was, okay, what's different here? I think one big thing was the desire to allow solo stakers, so parties that were not as sophisticated, to participate. And MEV Boost and PBS was basically a way to try to contain the specialization to this layer and this role that was called the builder, that would essentially make these complex trade-off decisions in an auction that was competitive. The idea being that if you were a validator, even if you were not sophisticated and you were just proposing blocks and validating Ethereum, you could still make as much money as the sophisticated parties by essentially receiving bids from those parties for your action space. And if you make that competitive, it's kind of better for the system than having it be side deals or opaque. So that was kind of the background with MEV Boost. Of course, there's problems with it. Key among them is it relies on centralized trusted parties to achieve a lot of its guarantees. And I think that's really what we're trying to move away from in the next phase.
If you enjoyed all of that, then you'll absolutely love the Bankless newsletter. Join over 300,000 fellow readers, all for free. Click below to sign up.